Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. My name's Jo Dixon, and I have the joy of looking after the Research Advantage program, so it's great to be here this afternoon. It's wonderful to see so many faces in front of me, but also great to have about 20 people or remote locations joining us this afternoon via Zoom. So I'd just like to remind our participants remotely that just to make sure your microphone's turned off and your video is off so that your screen doesn't come up in multiples of 1,000 here with us in the lecture room this afternoon. I'd like to acknowledge and pay our respects to Pamalung clan of the Awabakal people, traditional custodians on the land of which this campus is situated. I also like to acknowledge and pay respect to other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander nation from which our students, researchers, staff and community are drawn. So welcome everybody this afternoon. The hard part for me is over now. I'd like to introduce Belinda Peden, who a lot of you will know from the Grants office in the Research and Innovation Division. Belinda is one of our senior grants officers and is the right hand, or could be the left hand woman, who works alongside Judy Alexander. So our grants team work extraordinarily hard to make sure all of your applications have everything ticked, T's crossed and I's dotted before anything is submitted. So they work tirelessly on your behalf, and it's a joy to have you here to take us through some of the ins and outs of ARC rope statements. Thank you. Leave it to you.
Thank you, Jo. I'm not sure about right or left hand, but certainly we're a very small and hardworking team in the Research Grants Office, and I'd like to echo Jo's acknowledgement and respects to the Awabakal people and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander nations of our staff, students and community. So I'm here briefly to talk to you about rope from the Research Office perspective, and then obviously you'll hear from one of your colleagues, Associate Professor Ken Williams, who was successful in the recent round of Discovery Grant applications. Yep. So what is rope? Some of you will be very familiar with this, some of you it will be probably the first time you've seen it. The ARC uses what they call research opportunity and performance evidence to assess the quality of investigators involved in proposals for funding across all of the schemes that the ARC offers. It was introduced first back in 2011, and if we look at the ARC rope policy statement, it was introduced to help provide a more realistic consideration of the researchers' capabilities and to assist those who have had career interruptions for family and other reasons. So ROPE evaluates your career history relative to current career stage, and it considers whether productivity and contribution matches the opportunities that have been available to you as a researcher. The focus is on quality and benefit of achievements rather than the quantity or the rate of particular achievements. We recently had a presentation last week in relation to NHMRC applications, and the feedback from reviewers then was the important thing was also to make sure that when you represent your career track record, for want of a better word, it's important that it's a narrative and that it makes sense. So that was something recently to come out from assessors, not from the ARC, but certainly I would expect Ken might touch on that a little bit later. It's important to represent things really clearly and easily for the assessors who are going through, you know, at times hundreds of applications during major grant round. So research opportunity looks at your career against the years you are post-PhD. Career interruptions such as periods of unemployment, childbirth, carer's responsibility, what they call misadventure, or debilitating illnesses are taken into account. They look at your access to research mentoring and other research facilities along with other relevant career experience or opportunities for research. Performance evidence really contextualises your research outputs relative to your opportunity. Research outputs include publications, what they term grey literature, consultancy reports or reviews, patents and policy advice, competitive grants, other research support, higher degree student completions, and things through to major exhibitions, compositions or performances, plant breeding rights, registered designs, invited keynotes and speakers addresses, and other professional activities and contributions to your research field. The requirements of ROPE between the schemes that the ARC offers differs, and it's really important to refer to the relevant scheme instructions to applicants for what is actually relevant to the particular scheme you're applying to. Just to give you a sense of where ROPE sits in terms of the selection criteria, it sits within the investigator, so the yellow section on this slide. And you'll see for, particularly for the fellowships, it's really highly weighted at 40%, but the minimum that it gets down to is 20%, so it's still a really important part of your application. And as I mentioned before, they vary between schemes, so I've put together this slide here just to give you a sense of what ROPE is across the schemes. Please bear in mind that this is based on the guidelines for last year's or the last round of schemes. We're still waiting for ARC to release the guidelines for the current or the upcoming rounds. In some instances, it's the current round that are open, but the guidelines aren't available. So there's two schemes that are currently open, but we don't have guidelines. Laureate Fellowships opened on the 18th of September, but we don't have those guidelines yet. And the same for the Industrial Transformation scheme, the training centres and the hubs, which were supposed to open on the 10th of September. We're awaiting the opening of Future Fellowships, which I imagine a lot of you are interested in, on Wednesday. So we'll have to see if they'll release those guidelines on Wednesday or whether we'll be in the same situation as we are for the other schemes. But if we look at this as a guide, hopefully there won't be too many changes. There's some common elements across the different schemes, and they really relate to current and previous appointments and positions, academic interruptions, the details of your academic career and opportunities for research, which includes evidence of research impact and contributions to the field. Currently held ARC projects, which pulls through from your RMS profile. So some of the things we pick up in Research Office is that maybe people's RMS profile isn't up to date, and therefore it's missing things like that. But unless we're aware that it's sort of blank or it's got one or two in there and we think we've seen your name a few more times, we're not going to pick up on that. So our advice is to make sure that your RMS profile is up to date at all times, but particularly leading into these schemes. Sometimes it just gets caught up in everything else and it's not updated, and we won't necessarily know that for you unless we're familiar with your background. And for the DECRA, Future Fellowship and Laureate Fellowships and the Industrial Transformation, two schemes, hubs and training centres, research outputs is also a common element of ROPE. So in terms of career interruptions, that's just some information up there which is available on the ARC website as well, but the important thing to note is for career interruptions as part of your ARC application, they actually have to be certified by the Deputy Vice-Chancellor of Research. And in order to claim a career interruption, it must be at least 1 month in duration. So if you are claiming a career interruption, you'll need to complete what's called an eligibility exemption request form. And you also need to get that to us ahead of time. The dates for that are on our website, on our webpage, against each particular scheme, because it obviously reflects the closing dates of the schemes as to when we need them. If in doubt, get in touch with us, please, at research-applications@Newcastle, and we can work with you on your career interruption and your eligibility exemption request. In terms of what's available to you to help you from a Research Office perspective with your application, it's always really valuable to look at applications that have been successful, particularly recently successful applications given the changes to the schemes. But it's also important to look at it in terms of your ROPE section to give you a sense really of how to frame your responses and what the benchmarks might be around successful applicants. So as it says on the slide, please contact us via research-applications to book a time to come and view the hard copy of the application at the research office. The reason we do it in hard copy is to make sure that we're able to control the dissemination of what is essentially someone's personal application for a research grant, and it actually allows us to have a greater access to the number of applications for you guys than it would if they were electronic, because people are nervous about where that information may end up. In terms of the Research Impact Case Study Toolkit, our strategy colleagues have created this, this Research Engagement Impact Toolkit. It's a really comprehensive resource, but also the staff there are able to work with you one-on-one as well to help you develop that side of your application. There's a SharePoint site, but if you just want to go into our website and type in Research Impact Case Study Toolkit, that will lead you there as well. There's also the faculty librarians who can assist you with your field-weighted citation impact metrics, and they've also assisted in the past with identifying publications for applicants to include in their applications or in their RMS profiles. In terms of the key dates that we have, except for Centres of Excellence, they haven't even preempted what those dates will be. But if we use the same timing as last year, looking at probably around opening in May and closing in early July. These key dates are on our scheme pages on our website, but I just thought it might be helpful to put them together in one slide so that you could get a sense of when things are due. If you're interested in the linkage program, the linkage projects, I should say, because it's a continuous scheme, the last date for 2019 that you can submit is the 6th of December 2019. But again, please get in touch with our office if you're looking at putting in a linkage project. One thing that I'd just like to remind you is that it's really important from our perspective in terms of submitting applications is that we need your certifications and your fully signed cover sheets by the internal closing date. If you've got any questions, again, please get in touch with us at Research-Applications as soon as possible. It's always helpful for us too to just know ahead of time. So when you start your application in RMS, that prompts our system to create a record for you that you're interested in this scheme, and what that then does is allows our automated processes to fire off to you our essential instructions, which really steps you through the processes and what needs to happen. So don't leave it to the last minute to kind of start in RMS, start in RMS earlier, and then that allows us to get our information to you. So if there's any, did you want to hold questions over, Joe? Or? I'm happy to take questions now if anyone's got any questions. Otherwise, I'm happy to lead on and let Ken talk about his. Excellent. Happy. Thank you.
Thanks, Belinda. It's now our pleasure to invite Associate Professor Ken Williams to come and give us a bit of an insight into his recent experience with this part of his application. So welcome, it's great to have you here, and thanks for giving up your time.
You're welcome.
There you go.
Yeah, looks like I'll have to update my picture. I'm having a bit of growth there now. So what I'll basically talk to you about, just my experiences in the last 10 years since I've been here, since finishing my PhD in 2008. And it's probably more from an industry perspective. Probably 80% of our research projects now are have industry involvement, and then the others are direct, ARC discoveries. So just a little bit of a background where we sit in the research space within Newcastle University. I did my PhD here started part-time in about 2001, finished in 2007, I graduated in 2008. I've been working as a research associate since then, pretty much on industry projects, so self-funded up until probably 3 months ago, and now I'm back to mechanical engineering. So just basically funding my position throughout that period and developing basically the research that I'll go through and show what we've done in the last 10 years. Just in our area and what we're driving, it's probably, and I think across the university it should be a good strong appetite for young researchers to do this, is looking at cross-disciplinary research. So that's what we're looking for now, and I'll talk a little bit about that in the context of industry and about industry challenges. But our area, we look at historically mining and mineral processing, so it's sort of a strong involvement in that sector. That's to traditional coal, iron ore, but now to the new mining elements that we use for basically driving into more electric vehicles and automation and the like. Agriculture and biomass, so looking at energy transitions from basically perspective of materials handling and also agricultural space feed. Anything that you get from paddock, support, or processing beyond, we look at that sort of area in the materials handling stream. That goes into the energy and resources, and we've got projects now that are working in that sector, sort of energy crops and the like. Integrated over all of this is design and modelling.
You're a walker, so I'm going to pop this on because our people on Zoom are screaming at me at the moment that they cannot hear you.
Yeah.
So I'll let you put that in wherever it's most comfortable. That's okay.
Sorry, everyone in
That's
Zoom.
okay.
I'm a walker.
Thank you, Jim.
Yeah, so for those in Zoom, I'll just quickly go through. This is a sector for the Centre for Bulk Solids and Particular Technologies and the research projects that we're currently undertaking. Last is health and environments, so dust and particulate characterisation. And just projects we've got that are collaborative now in nature. I'm traditionally mechanical engineering, but we've got projects with chemical engineering and civil engineering. And then we've got environmental remediation here, and also New South Wales DPI with soil science, and also the forestry units. So they're working we're working together. In health and environments, especially in dust, we're working with respiratory specialists over in HMRI on basically that interface between dust, airborne dust particles, and then the inhalation, and then the transfer of that through the body, and then how that affects the lungs. So looking at that basically from the dust source, how it presents itself, to the human interface. So that gives an idea of the areas that we work in for research. So what I'll go through here with really the key elements of preparing a grant, because I'll talk about it as far as I usually do it is prepare the grant, and that gives me an idea of how I'm going to structure or the narrative that I'm going to put into my rope, because it really is dependent on what grant you're applying for, depending on the style, tone, level that you write for that rope statement. So talking about that motivation for the grant, pilot studies, if there are any, what to look for in the pilot studies. Budget preparation is a big thing, especially industry, because what we want to do is be successful in our completion of the project. So we want to make sure we fund appropriately. And that's quite important for how we structure that grant, and then how we drive requirement of that grant to what resources we need, which is material resources for conducting the project physically, and then the personnel resources. Just a little bit on narrative creation. Also graphics. Graphics can help a lot, not just in ARC, it's certainly in industry. Both reviewers and industry personnel are time poor. Track records as well, just that relevance of track records, and we'll talk about ARC to industry, any differences there. Grant selection, just things to consider, and that alternative to government grants, which we'll go through. And we've already talked about, sorry, not the Centre of Excellence, and then just talk about submission, how we submit that, and we'll touch on that. So, what do we want in that grant? So what is the purpose? Why do we need it? For me, it's always, what is the challenge that you want to achieve? You know, whether it is an ARC discovery grant and you want to go and basically find a new fundamental process or fundamental information that you want to go and drive, hopefully then for dissemination out into the wider area. Or whether it's something that is still needs some fundamental knowledge, but there is a strong linkage component to that. So what scheme can be employed there. To the other spectrum where industry do have a direct challenge that we have the capability to help solve. And that may be a short time scale to a longer time scale. So I'll talk about that. So then it's about where are you writing it for, and what is the grant scheme? So what is that social consideration? What is that social impact, if it has one? The economic, and for us, it is all three, the economic and environmental impact. Whatever we do has an economic impact. We want to reduce emissions, we want to reduce energy, we want to be more socially conscious in how we design things, its full life cycle use, and we want to make sure it has low environmental impact. So that's really what drives us in that research space. And so from that, hopefully it'll pass that, what if? Why are we doing it? What is the purpose? So it's always identifying what is that challenge and what does that challenge want to address. So what is that new, as I put in there, the new solution to that challenge. So what I find is compelling evidence is if we can grab information that's already been conducted. Hopefully we've conducted the studies, or we have enough relevant experience within that sector to bring in other research that has been conducted elsewhere. So have a look at what has been done. You can see this in grant writing all the time. What's the history? What's the background? What are the precedents to basically that research? So that gives us that ability to justify with data. And so I call it the evidence. What is the evidence to show what has been done to where we're progressing to? So where is that step change? Are we making a big step change or a small step change? Can we tie that for us in engineering, in economics, and the environmental and social side of things? So we're going to weave that into how that's going to benefit basically the challenge. Because there's two things. If we think of it from an ARC point of view, they want to see an advancement, and they're really relying on us to show that we've got the insight to show the advancement and we've got the experience to conduct that advancement. With industry, what they want is to know that we can do it, but they've got to go then to whoever we're talking to in industry, they have to get approval above there. So we've got to give them enough information that they can go internally and then present that to get the money. So they're the two basic extremes of getting that money from a government perspective to a solely industry perspective. So one of the things they talk about, certainly with us, is technology readiness. How far are we along the technology spectrum for implementation into an industrial system? So that technology readiness level is really good to show where we're at. And that technology readiness can also be an indicator of which grant scheme that you need. Is it at the pilot scale? Is it just done at a small scale within a lab, or has it had some pilot data, some larger pilot scale, or is it a pioneer scale, which is just prior to an industrial scale? So that gives us an idea of the technology readiness. You can also think about that technology readiness about what grant scheme that it may be appropriate for. The technology readiness is also an indicator of how interested the industry partner may be and how much funding they're prepared to put in, depending on their risk. The higher the technology readiness, the lower the risk. So there are things to think about. So that's the important thing about pilot data. What is it, and at what technology readiness level is it at? So just to show you, I thought I'd put up an example. This is basically the research summary of what we've led in the last 10 years, since 2010. And what I've got is, we've had 3 ARC discovery projects. So I've got one just finishing now and one just commenced this year, with one in application at the moment. We've got 3 Amira projects. So that's basically an industry facilitator. It used to be Australian Minerals Industry Research Associate. Now it's Amira because it's global. ACARP, Australian Coal Association Research Projects. So they're ones that have been basically quite successful because we've had international maritime organisation standards now developed from those programs. And just a part of a industrial transformation hub at the moment. So I lead 1/3 of a hub program, which is finishing this year, and now we're developing with the industry partners application for a hub 2. Just the Department of Innovation, Industry and Science schemes, which commenced, I think it was about 3 or 4 years ago. So we can talk a little bit about that. That's about, which grant should we select for what project. They're actually quite good startup projects if we can get them, because they can lead into larger projects. And then over the years, between short-term 3-month projects to 2-year projects, there's been about another 56 different ones across spectra, from mining to agriculture to even in the Pacific looking at waste utilisation. So those sort of research opportunities. And then in just this period under the old Newcastle Innovation System, which used to be TUNRA prior to that, and worked on 50 bulk solids industry projects, which range from a week to maybe 3 months. Outcomes, currently we've got 2 provisional patents, 1 software code, and we're in the process of probably another 2 patents in some of the research outputs. So that's basically give you a spectra of when I discuss about the different options and different grant schemes. That's a wide variety of grant schemes that basically I've been involved in. Budget preparation. So you saw the money value there. So how do we prepare the budget? So there is a funding scheme, so it has to fit in with the funding scheme. Know what the rules are and what you can and cannot spend from the funding scheme. So, and then what is the project deliverables? So little applications that I've had, or the applications I've had are from ARC Discovery grants, ARC linkage grants, parts of cooperative research centres, CRS Cooperative Research Centre projects, an application. They haven't been successful yet, but certainly applied with industry. And, direct industry grants or science and innovation grants. So have a look what you can and cannot do in that funding scheme. So it's iterative, what's the funding scheme, what's available to what the project is. So how do we develop the project funding? So what do we want to do? It always comes back to what is the challenge that we want to solve. And so from that challenge, what you may have to do is have different milestones. And maybe the first one is, okay, we want to get to a solution at the end, but we're not sure what pathway we need to get there ultimately, but we do know there is a stage 1 to go and conduct. So with industry, if I talk to them, it's about, okay, well, let's conduct this first part of the project. Maybe we can go to the university, maybe they've got co-funding schemes to put some money in. So what's available there? So that may be a first stage to minimise risk for the industry. And also for us to actually get some pilot, and that may provide some additional pilot data for larger projects. So that's really what you want the funds for. So how mature is it and what are the risks as far as how far we have to extend beyond the current knowledge. That's on the industry perspective, but an ARC perspective is, well, they want big transitions, but they want to know that you can do it and they want to know it's feasible and how you can conduct that. So that's got to be part of the road. So, yeah, up here it's like, yeah, so go in there and okay, my experience is I go and know what the funding scheme is. If it's an ARC discovery, then it's I want to achieve this in roughly 3 years. We know it's going to have PhD involvement. We want generally with us research associate support and some money for basically usually other consumable support for the infrastructure we're going to use for experimentation. So a discovery project is quite, for us, well structured and usually 1 or 2 PhDs, and that's within that funding umbrella. For a linkage project, then we still want PhDs, but there's going to be more money for equipment and experimental design and experimental outputs, because that experimental information is what industry can get early gains from. We'll still use that as validation for PhD, basically programs and whatever theoretical model they come up with. That in the linkage is generally on getting the industry outcomes early. For the other for the other schemes I'll talk about later, well, with other industry schemes that they have, yeah, it's just a mix, depending again what the funding is for and what the assessment criteria is for, and that's how you relate your rope to that. One of the things I've put up here is add milestones. So milestones are really good because you can then reduce things down to, okay, what do I need to achieve this milestone? What are the resources I need? And then once I identify that, there's costing to the resource, and then the budget drops out. That's what I find and always do with all my research, all of them, from ARC discoveries up into just industry projects. Work out what we need to do it, what is the budget. If the budget's over what's available, then I'll have to think about how do I modify this program. Or maybe I shorten its scope, so those sorts of things. So that's it is for the budget, be realistic. And that's how you be realistic. You actually do that resourcing and then put the money into just a spreadsheet. So mechanism graphics. This is every grant where we can. There's some applications that don't allow mechanism graphics. CRCPs are one, but ARC applications are. Industry, it's so beneficial to be able to put a graphic in a flow chart or a flow diagram, how things link together for the whole project. So this is just an example. We've got this is actually we're driving this. We've got about $1 million in funding at the moment for tailings to topsoil research program. But this is about showing how the whole project is driving towards an outcome. So developed this. This actually we developed probably 3 years ago, and it took me 2 years of discussion to try to get the first funding. And then from that, it's rolling on. But what it is this is an example of what we saw as a challenge. Yep. Narrative. Oh, yeah. Narrative creation, because what it is with narrative creation is writing all these elements that they're after in any of the grants is about, how is the challenge going to be addressed? So what you got to do in the narrative first is write what makes you the person to address that challenge. So first of all, the proposal is this is a challenge to be addressed, okay? And what you've got to show is how you and your team and the collaborators are going to address that challenge, why you have the experience to do so. And so with with ARC RUT, they've got the little classifications there. So it's really writing that up with your basically experience and your metrics. So metrics, you have your narrative and you talk about yourself, but having a little dot points after highlighting those metrics in the narrative is quite good, contained within the word limits. So that's how we generally approach from ARC to Amira grants, talking about who the researchers are and what they have as far as for their project. An example, with an ARC discovery grant I wrote, which was on pneumatic conveying of biomass. Well, that was easy. I've got a strong track record in publications for pneumatic conveying, and we've been driving into the new area of biomass handling. So from here, that narrative was more about the technical capability that we have to develop new models within the biomass pneumatic conveying grant. When I talk about this the tailings to topsoil project, it's more about the application of research and about the ability to coordinate a multi-faceted team in driving those deliverables. So those deliverables are driven by milestones. So there's a soil science part, there's a materials handling part, there's a design element part, and then they follow on with other milestones. And so each of those milestones have resource requirements. And from that, it's then showing the team, and certainly the lead, being able to first coordinate and to show that you can coordinate, that you have done that coordination or been involved in that coordination, that type of coordination, that large scale project. So that's the first thing, is like when you become lead to it, you've got to become lead for the first time sometime, but to be involved in those projects prior, it will be imperative to show that transitioning capability. So there, hopefully that answers narrative and where it sits. So from a discovery point of view to a large scale, multifaceted project with different disciplines. So so with the graphics, so that's just giving that whole project, basically a nice summary in one. So, and again, it's like the rope. It gives that holistic idea of the project, and therefore you can then go and talk about your rope in context of that as well. So, and this is where it comes track record. Okay, so on our track record, as Belinda said, it's important the assessment process and has different weightings depending on the ARC schemes. And for industry, they just want to know that you have the experience to conduct the project. So that's where I've summarised in the ARC. It's a major factor and that proof of success for industry. So for demonstration that you can complete the project, so that's where track history comes in. To give you an idea, 3 ARC discovery grants so I've been part of. The first one I was 3rd CI on, so that was about 6-7 years ago. Then the next one I was 2nd CI on, and then the last one I'm lead CI on. So there's that track record, building that track record with your team and where you sit in there. So for industry, in 2008, then, I was just part of working with engineers and that, and then slowly as you get experience, and then you start leading the projects. And then one project became a bigger project. So that's actually, in my experience, what happened was smaller projects became bigger projects until they became very large projects. And I was lead CI on all of them. So that's how that transition came up to the large major projects. So that goes down to the point for using your partnerships to boost your track record. So it's having that collaborative element and building, I think when we did research leadership, we heard the term lead researcher and research leader. So lead researcher generally wants to be first on everything, and they're at the front, they're seen to lead the research. Or you've got a research leader that builds more, it's more a collaborative workspace and things like that. So the lead researcher was probably an older way of looking at things, which was more dominant. And I've seen that transition here. So now everyone, there's a lot more collaboration, and we're pushing to multi-faculty collaboration, multidiscipline collaboration. So having those research teams and being part of basically solving the challenge from a holistic point of view. So with industry, that's what that partnerships provide, that holistic approach. Not, okay, industry has a challenge and you go, oh, yep, I can solve that part, but you're going to have to find, I've got no basically knowledge of how to achieve the other parts. So, but what we do quite well is go, okay, here is the challenge. We can do this part. Let's identify what we don't know and what the area is that needs to be investigated. Do we have the research capability within the university to go and do that? Or if not, elsewhere, who else do we know? Who can we talk to? So, sometimes research projects we haven't got up because we can't provide that holistic approach, but other ones we have. And so that's also a selection about whether to pursue that project. So you may find a project that, on the periphery, it seems like it's you may be able to solve it, but when you go and have to talk to the people, you actually can't. So it's better to say, oh, yes, we don't, but you may be, I always try and go and say, well, you may be able to talk to this group, or facilitate an email exchange. So that's always nice to do. In any case, that threshold, basically what that threshold track records, if the scheme has threshold track records, the university may be able to give some guidance on that historically, on what they may be, and, how many publications, refereed publications as first author. DECRA is probably strong in that, those applications about how many you have, especially as first author. So that leads into research articles. And so when you develop your rope, and this is the narrative, what have you done in the research article space? So I've just put up my, just a quick summary of what I've done. And there's one thing you'll notice, and when I see other people's track records, I know my weighting on conferences is quite high. So I've got nearly double the conference articles than I do journals. There's two reasons for that. One is I'm time poor to write journals, because of other applications, because there is a lot more that I'd like to translate. And the other one is there's a lot of industry conferences we go to. So we do have the academic conferences, and we have the mixed conferences and industry conferences. The other thing is the reports as well. So the different reports, which may or may not be able to be publicly available. And the other thing you do with track record on to build your network within industry is being able to provide those short information notes. And they're typically milestone generated, like to go. And even if you can preempt without industry having to ask. Here we've summarised these research findings. We think this is good information for you to have. And here's a short little research note on what we've found. To, regular reporting. So if we go to industry, even in ARC linkage, and the transformation hub I've currently got. Just came back from my 1 hour meeting with BHP, and I have that every 2 weeks. So it's just a quick 1 hour catch up on what we've been doing within that sector, if there's any barriers to progress, and if there's anything that we want to put as send as a milestone for we've sent and we want to follow up on it. So they're important for basically that sort of effort, and all that endeavour you report on, in your rope, regular industry meetings, and have that in the narrative, and also your dot points. So, I'm going to go to the next, probably 2 slides are important, is the government grant selection. So I've talked a lot about it, like what's the grant scheme? We know we've got the spectra from pure discovery, which is really driving the new science and new ways to think about what where you want to take the research. So it's not necessarily a challenge, to the other spectra of industry challenges. So, which grant scheme to select? It's going to be really, for us, dependent on money to a certain extent. If we have a look at, and time. So if we have a look at the science and innovation funds that we have, they're a $50,000 grant from the government with $50,000 maximum input from industry. So it's a 1-to-1 funding. So it's a maximum of $50,000 and $50,000 for a 1-year research program. And then companies get 2 bites of that grant scheme. But that's for small to medium enterprises only. But that's a pathway to get that collaboration in the small to medium enterprises. Then we go to things like CRCPs. They can be $1 million a year, usually 3, I think, to 4 years or 5 years or 4 years. But that's really looking at something that's just about to be commercialised. So cooperative research centre projects, small one. Then we've got, then in that space, in that government industry space, you've got a lot of commercialisation schemes as well. So there's a lot of different options there. Then you've got ARC linkage. So ARC linkage, probably between the schemes I said and ARC, discoveries is where the ARC linkage sit. That's why we look at it as going, okay, we've got still a little bit of science that we've got to go and undertake, but there is enough pilot data there to say, yep, we'll be able to get some industry gains from this. That brings industry in because that's what they've got to go and be sold on. And then finally, the other one is you have expertise, you have the research capability that industry needs to solve their problem pretty much immediately for in a 3-month to 6-month timeline, and they'll fund that directly. Or in the case of tailings to topsoil, they funded it because they see that as a huge benefit. So I've got 3-year funding just straight from industry. Either of those that we do, any of that where we get industry cash, what we also do is look to see how we may be able to, is there an opportunity to leverage that industry cash? So, okay, if we get the industry cash, can we leverage that against government money? We can start the project and we just see research branch, and that'll tell us about our rules for the funding scheme of when or how much we can use to leverage against those schemes. So just on the points here is match that grant objectives with the research objectives. So that's a good thing to go and have a look. So it's still going back to the funding scheme and having a look at those research objectives. Previously funded projects, in our cohort, we can have a look at those. I don't know what the university can provide.
So
Linda?
under the grants team, you can, in successfully funded HMRC or ARC, you can actually book a time to go and have a look at those So what I should say to it? Yeah.
What I should say is that it's not all of the applications, it's the applications where the CIs have allowed the application to be accessed. There are some reasons why there might be commercial in confidence, or there might be other aspects to the application that are sensitive, and in those cases they're not available, but we do have a suite of applications across I would say almost every scheme that's available, except for some of the targeted ones, where we do have what we call exemplary applications that are available. Yeah, just contact us via research-applications. You can look at them as many times as you need to. It's not a one-off thing. You can certainly access them whenever you need to. Particularly, I don't know if you've done this, Ken, but other researchers who are writing DECRAs or some of the fellowship applications will look at it, go away and write a little bit of their own, and then come back and look at the applications again and maybe reframe their application. So I don't think it's a one-off. It's certainly whenever you need access to it.
How would we know which applications are actually available to look at your database?
No, so what you would contact us and say that you wanted to look at DECRA or future fellowships. You tell us the scheme. And then whatever is available, we'll allow you to have access to. It might be, so some people, for example, recently someone came to look at DECRAs. They were interested in DECRAs that were kind of in their area. So you might have a DECRA from, humanities, but you might be an engineer. So you're looking for the sort of engineering ones or vice versa. There may not be one specifically in your discipline, but it certainly will give you a sense of the way that track record, or the way they've approached their rope, or the way they've written in some of the research outputs, or framed even their research proposals. So it just depends on what you're looking for, and it doesn't necessarily have to be something that's exactly the same as what you're doing. Hopefully it's not, because then it would possibly not get funded, but it's certainly just to give you a sense of what has been successful and assessed as successful and fundable.
Thanks. Yeah, so non-government grants, because academia was focused on government grants, and now there's a push for basically impact, more impact, and also non-grant funding. So what we've got is, our one is industry, but also NGO funding, and we do have local government funding and some co-funding in some of our grants. So that's from our perspective, where funding has come from. None from philanthropy yet. But what it does is it does require that building of, basically those contacts. So how do we get those contacts? What has the university here got to provide and help you with those, facilitate those contacts? So we've got the two big institutes, HMRI and NIER. So I'm part of NIER. I had industry contacts prior to NIER's establishment, but NIR has certainly helped, basically expand that contact. With the contacts, it's important to note, and with any of those institutes, or whether you're assistant dean researchers or research trainers, can facilitate any of that contact depending on what that's the faculty can provide there. One of the things is if they can, they'll provide a contact, but it's up to you to go and have a proposal and talk about the research context of what you're providing. Maybe just as information in the first instance for industry, as far as, okay, this is my capability. Or our capability as a group, if you've got a group. So that may spark interest from that industry. And it has on our occasions as a first point of call to talk about research projects, which we do have now. So that's really the start of the project and how you look at building those partnerships within industry. And I've already talked about enough about, what is that challenge? How can your research help achieve what challenge they've got in industry? And then really looking at those collaborative approaches. I must admit, pretty much all the industry projects we've got now have some form of collaboration across discipline. Definitely, and cross-faculty in some of the larger projects. And again, as I said before, once we get this money, there's two things, and I'll say about leveraging the money. Historically, we used to go, and I did it as well, go into a linkage grant and go get industry interested in this linkage grant, and I even got them interested in a training centre. application, so Industrial Transformation Training Centre. Okay, they're getting interested and you form up the project. What happens when you don't get the ARC money? What do you say to your industry partners now? You're trying to develop a relationship. So what I usually do is go in and say, how do we start the project now, given your funding? It could be even as simple as a PhD program. Let's fund a PhD student. $30,000 a year, you get industry stipend, $30,000 a year, so 3.5 years. The university will generally cover their, basically the other fees, and you can actually start some of the research that way.
Can I just add to
Sure.
that, Jen?
Just to clarify that, it's been an issue that's required some negotiation, I guess, over the last 12 months. So there's always shifting goalposts. So in terms of the HDR stipends, so you request those in your applications, and depending on which scheme, there are some limits. So I think maybe DECRAs and futures, there's a limit to how many you can ask for in your application. But across the other schemes, there is a cost to the university of the tuition fee component of the RHD. HDR is the correct term. So what you need to do if you're looking to include one of those stipends in your application is to get in touch either with us in the research office, or you can go direct to the Dean of Graduate Studies and request approval for the tuition fee component to be waived. So that's a really important step if you're doing that.
That's very good, Belinda. It is, because we've just recently got a one from Mac Energy and just had it's a PhD basically stipend, and we got pre-approval for basically the cover of the tuition fees. Because for engineering, it's $18,000 per year on a domestic student, and $38,000 for an international student for those tuition fees. So get the pre-approval first. But it is a good way to start that collaboration on a PhD program. And so that's one way of getting that cash in for a period of time. And if you get a little bit more money, we usually work on $50,000 a year cash, and then you've got in kind. It's probably our baseline for putting in a linkage grant. So that's for non-government grants. So that basically finishes my discussion. But the big theme, and if you take away from my talk today, is always for us the project, how we write the project up and how we write our rope are interlinked together. So the narrative you write, depending on what the components are, and they are different for different schemes, is about what your experience is and how you're going to address the project. What makes you and your team have the capability to do that. Okay, and, so thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. I might get you to stay here just
Sure.
in case we have some questions. So I'll ask if there's any questions in the room. And in particular to that rope, how you frame that and that narrative. Can I ask you just to put your hand up if you've got a question, and we'll take that via a microphone so people online can hear. For those zooming in, if you can just send them through via chat if there's any questions. So I'll go to the room first. Are there any questions?
Michael, you're always right.
Hi, so it's me again. Just I have a few quite specific questions, and maybe you have some insight. So the first one is, if you are a CI on a grant that has multiple investigators, so for instance, LEAF grants usually have 8 to 10, or I don't know what, many of them. On one hand, it looks good, obviously, in the grant record, which I thought, and then on the next DP application, we got the comment, or what's actually your contribution on that grant with many investigators. Do you have a tip on how to very positively frame that yes, there's many other investigators, but obviously you still contributed to the grant?
Yeah. You answer what your role is. You answer what your role is in that LEAF grant. Your commentary about number of other investigators, that's, to me, it's not something you can answer why so many. I mean, they've got all their different inputs, their usage. You're really focusing on yourself and go, okay, I'm part of this. You'd be writing in your context of yourself. I'm part of a large group and have a large, basically, that this equipment has a large user network, and my role in this is A, B, C, D. And it's probably going to be short, like a paragraph. It's of this ARC application.
And the other one would maybe be in terms of actually writing the rope section. Do you have a specific tips on the layout that you use? Do you use more dot points or narrative style? Can you include graphics on how maybe citations develop, journal impact factors? I'm sure all this kind of makes a difference, but no one seems to actually wanting to share what the rope statement looks like.
Okay, my traditional one is a narrative at the start, and then highlight, and then dot points as a highlight to that section of the rope. It depends on what the RMS comes out with. I mean, they're moving, there's sections there you can actually upload a PDF. So if there isn't any explicit exclusion of graphics and you think it's going to be worthwhile to summarize it. Put it in a graphic on a PDF. There's no reason why not to. But on the other sections that you can't upload a PDF, of course, you can't add graphics. So, but it's usually a narrative and then dot point. And then usually, if I can, a summary at the end, so it just doesn't look, then it ends at a dot point, just something that, rounds everything off.
Just to add to that, Ken, some feedback recently from some assessors. Again, I think I mentioned before, NHMRC level rather than ARC, and there might be differences, but their advice to people asking very similar questions about how to represent their track record was to consider it in terms of the fact that they're reading multiple applications all within a really short time frame, and it's to, try not to have big blocks of text, try to come up with a format for you that allows the important things to stand out and to represent yourself clearly and effectively without them having to dig through to find out what it is that you want to present to them. So it's trying to find that format for you that works.
Yeah, and so that's my format I use. Yeah, not too much narrative because I know what it's like reading them. But a little bit of narrative is good, and then the dot points.
Okay, any more questions from the floor in here? Okay, I don't think we've got any either. Last chance online. Any other questions? Okay, I think that's where we will conclude. So many thanks, Ken, for your time this afternoon, and I appreciate you coming in off the back of a meeting, an industry meeting. Also to Belinda, really appreciate your time today. I am just going to quickly go through 3 sessions that are coming up. Thank you. For our EMCRs, we've got Lee Smith from Science taking us through a talk on the traditional academic versus the professional academic, just some insights, and there'll be some discussion around that. The other one that's coming up that I think those that are preparing grant submissions, we've got the ARC budget and also direct research costs for NHMRC. That's on Wednesday the 9th of October. And the other one is we're going to look at some tips for that first page, that project description. How do we make and engage with our assessors so that they have to turn that next page and read more about your submission? So that's going to be presented by a couple of our College of Experts and those that have been on a number of review panels. What captures them? What's the hook that makes them that they just have to turn the page to read the rest of that grant submission? So we're going to go through that on the 16th of October. Yes? Yep. The question is, will today's session, the PowerPoint presentation, be available? They certainly will. And once we've sought permission from our presenters, if that's given, we'll also have the Zoom recording available as well. So thank you for that. All right, everyone, thanks for coming. And don't forget, if you've got any other questions that you think about afterwards, shoot them into research_advantage@newcastle.edu.au, and then we'll get that out to people that can help answer those questions better than what I can. Have a great afternoon, everyone. Thank you. Thanks, Ken.